The only way for me to have achieved my own needs was to then look for other people who shared those same needs, and so collectively we could work together. The people who I approached were really folks who knew that some of their individual needs could only be satisfied by collective action. I think that one of the things that they knew about me that was that if I came with an issue, it was something that I also personally cared about, that I wasn't carrying a message that wasn't mine. And so they trusted me. Early in my married life, when my husband and I moved with our children from Portland back to his hometown of Salem, there was this giant picture in the paper of me and my two children standing in front of one of our bookcases. It was labeled Mrs. Eugene, Ellen Lowe, and all of the wording was about my husband, who was now working in Salem and had grown up there and graduated from Salem schools and Willamette University. No mention of me at all. Going back to my early days in Salem, the League of Women Voters and AAUW put together a roster of qualified women. And we submitted this to cities, to counties, and certainly to the state, because we had noticed the lack of gender equity, gender even appearance in terms of non-discrimination. So I smile when I think about it because we said qualified women. And so we put in our backgrounds, our educational background, our work background, everything. And the more I think about it, some of the men that we ended up replacing eventually, they weren't qualified and no one had ever looked. I remember a county commissioner in Curry County introducing me, not in glowing terms, but just saying, and there's that housewife from Salem. And so I started writing some of my memos from the kitchen of Ellen Lowe. There was a school budget election when there was a terrible full-page ad taken out against it. I wrote a letter to the editor because it was full of fiction rather than fact. And so as a result of that, the usual committee that supported the school budget, they asked me if I might like to come down and meet with them. And I said, certainly, but I had no idea what was going to take place, because when I began to talk about the inadequacy of the Salem schools and the need to go back for another election, many of them disappeared. I actually then got some of my league friends and AAUW friends and the kindergarten group together and we formed the Citizens Committee for Good Schools, and we had coffees all over Salem. And we were able eventually to get the school budget passed. I became the first woman president then of the League of Oregon Cities. And in the League of Oregon Cities, the project that really began when I was the vice president was one that had real roots in some of the information that I had gathered those years observing revenue. We put together a proposal for revenue sharing for cities because it was a time of growth in terms of Oregon's economy, but the restrictions on property tax left many cities really with very limited funds to really take care of some of the growth that was occurring. The Ecumenical Ministries had what they called a legislative commission, and the Lutheran representative for the state resigned, and so I was appointed then to the legislative commission by the Lutheran Synod in Oregon. And so that gave me a position on a group that looked at policies and began to make decisions. Actually, as the new session began, then they did hire me to be their half-time director, associate director for Legislative Commission. I found that all the issues that were part of the social principles that Ecumenical Ministries had adopted, they weren't half-time. And so I usually spent most of the day in Salem, and I would commute back and forth. And so the issues that we became involved in, many of them grew out of things that churches were doing. And among them were the food pantries, where there was real concern across the state about the growing number of families who didn't seem to be able to make it, and that many of these people were working families. The other was the minimum wage. And so we became involved in the minimum wage because, again, people who were working full-time still did not have adequate resources. That's not a new issue now, but then we were just really beginning to talk about doing something statewide. And so the first increase in the minimum wage to $3.35 an hour actually took place within the legislature. And this took lots of folks visiting legislators, talking about what was going on in their community, in their households. And so it happened. Well, that first initial No on 9 campaign was one that really labeled anyone who was homosexual as a whole list of just terrible, terrible things. It was a labeling of hate and misinformation. It was just awful. When the group that got together in Portland that said, when this ballot measure finally made the ballot, said, we have to do something. They asked me to join them, and there was a group of about, maybe 10, 12 of us who had a press conference at the Episcopal Church, the diocese. We each made a statement, and I really, in many ways, don't remember exactly what I said, but I know what I talked about was the dehumanization that this type of measure would bring to our neighbors, maybe to our children, maybe really to all of us. After the press conference, I was getting in my car and going to go back to the office. And the group converged on me and said, Ellen, we need you. And I said, for what? And they said, we can't be our spokespersons right now in what's going on. We need someone like you who's a grandmother, who is known for extending love and compassion. We need someone like you to be our spokesperson. Well, I didn't say yes right away. I asked the president of Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, and he gave me his good wishes and said, you'll be taking on a task that sometimes will not be pleasant, but he said he thought I could do it. And so I did. Sometimes the most important thing I did was when I didn't quite understand what was going on, I would ask for clarification, and I would seek information. And so, unlike many lawyers who only ask a question when they know the answer, when I asked a question, it was because I was seeking answers and then listening and trying to work through.